Okay. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining. Give me 1 second to make sure everything's just pulling in. I have Blair Armitage with me right now. So you should be seeing her screen. And I'm just going to check through and answer a couple of these questions. Adam, we are not broadcasting this to Facebook. It is going through Artist Awake. So it's just you guys. And okay, yeah, oh yeah, you've already been answering the questions, so that's good. That's what we wanted to get in. All right, okay, so just another second. Those of you who are on Artist Awake, make a note in chat as soon as you hear me ask for that. That'd be great, and then we can go from there. And then those of you who are here live with me, I see you guys, and let's just make sure that we are doing this right. Okay. And there we go. All right, perfect.
Yay.
Okay, so Blair, thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So now we're live. So let me just start. The normal way I like to do this is just like to ask a couple of questions, get to know things, and then I know a lot of the students that were asking to meet you had questions which you've already been answering about the lighting and kind of how you get that illustrative quality, this just gorgeous quality. That really does the best out of 3D, but keeps it illustrative. So let's talk a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into this. But first, I guess to set the stage, like, what do you do now? Let's start there, actually. What do you do now?
Yeah, sure. So right now, for the last 2 months, I've been working as a character artist at Riot Games.
Yeah.
That's been really great fun. Before that, I was a freelance artist. I was living in Japan for a year, not working for any studios out there, but freelancing for a lot of US studios, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I managed to do some game work, which was really fun, and some stuff for miniatures, and also like larger size figurines.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like one of my big hobbies, so that was really great. Got to do quite a variety of stuff. Before that, I worked on the Forza series, so the racing games.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on that in the UK. That was a really nice little studio. And then, before that, my start was probably back in, I think it was around 2012. And that was working on Microsoft Kinect games, if you remember those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Nice. That's great. All right. So how did you train to get into this industry? What did you do? Did you go to school, take classes, self-taught?
Yeah, I went to university in the UK called De Montfort University in Leicester.
Yeah.
They had a game art course. I think at the time it had been running for around 5 or 6 years, so it was still relatively new.
Yeah.
And things were quite different back then, really. It was, compared to now, it was a totally different time. So we learned, traditional box modeling, like hand painted textures, things like baking and using normal maps and using shaders were like only kind of starting to gain traction, I suppose, in like the PS3 era. So we were still very much kind of previous gen. All the stuff we learned was more like PS2 stuff, but it was like a really, really good start, and just like it was a really great course. And I think now it's I'd actually really, really recommend that university to anyone in the UK. It was really, really great, and I'm still in touch with all those guys. So
that's great. What really would you say was really let's say one thing that was really great about what they did in terms of how they trained you?
I think having just like simple lessons where you just had to make kind of simple objects, like pick a building or pick one prop. And then what I would do is I would repeat that lesson over and over again until I understood what I was doing, because it took me a very long time to understand 3D.
Right.
So it took me at least a year, and then that entire summer of doing those simple lessons over and over again to understand what I was doing. It was very difficult for me to grasp it, because that was the first time I'd ever done 3D, and I was always like someone who liked drawing and 2D. I never even, when I was a kid, I never played with Lego, or I never really was interested in constructing things.
Yeah.
And then when we started to have some of the older students show ZBrush, or like ZBrush as you guys call it.
Yeah. I like Zed. Zed's a great guy.
ZBrush. Yeah, that was like, that really made me interested in 3D, because it was like, oh, I can do a painting almost, but using light and shadow to paint almost. That made so much more sense to me than like the box modeling approach. But just kind of brute forcing those initial lessons of box modeling. I know it's probably not the most elegant way to learn, but that's how I personally learn the best, is sometimes just by brute force repeating stuff over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So the key thing was one lesson, something simple that you could just repeat until you felt like you had some level of mastery.
Yes, that's very well described.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, there's a great section in the book, Talent Code, and it describes exactly that kind of learning, where a young girl is playing violin, and she'll play the part until she makes a mistake. She'll stop. She'll start over again until she makes a mistake. Stop. Start over until she can play it all the way through. So that she can just make sure she's got this mastery. So that's fantastic to hear. It's how we learn is one of the things I really want to start to dive into here, because you've also kind of, in my mind, you've got a style that you've worked with that I think is really, it's very Blair, right? It's very much yours.
Thank you.
Do you feel like you have your own style? Do you feel like you have this way that you make these things?
I don't know. I think really to develop style, I think I started a lot by honestly copying other people, copying other artists that I liked. So I copy a lot of like the Russian and Chinese and Japanese artists, because I'm really into the kind of Eastern style. I just really like find my favorite artists. So like I would copy like Vadim's work, and I would copy Bogdan's work, and just kind of, and it's funny because those guys like work at Riot and Blizzard, and I kind of see them, and it's really strange, because they're just like these normal people, and I just copy their stuff for the longest time to try and understand what they were doing.
Yeah. And now you're working right there with them.
Yeah, that's really, really strange. But yeah, I think the first step to doing it is imitation.
Yeah.
I'd say. And then eventually I just find you reach this level of confidence where you don't really copy in the same way. Like you kind of start to use reference in a different way, where you're not really copying the shape of the facial features anymore, but you're more taking cues from what they've done with the forms to give everything a good shape, or how they've posed the character in more dynamic ways. You kind of start taking cues of like more higher level decisions, rather than copying exactly how they've done a face,
right?
For example, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. But for those of you who are watching this live, this is actually a really important, I think, point for us to kind of drill just a little bit more on. So if you've got questions about this, make sure that you start. I'm looking at the chat right now, so I'll see the questions as they kind of come up.
Yeah.
But this idea of imitating is something that I've seen my own students kind of work on, because they're looking at your work and they're like, how do I get there? And I want to do this work, but then I don't want to just copy Blair. There's this emotional kind of guilt, I guess you could say.
I definitely understand that. It does feel quite shameful.
Yeah.
But I think it's honestly like the first step really is imitation. I think that's why you see a lot of stuff that does look very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any advice you can give for somebody who has that guilt?
Yeah, I'd say try and make your higher level creative decisions your own.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to imitate someone's style, you could imitate the way they've done facial proportions or how they've executed on like a certain sculptural style in the skin or in the pose, but try to kind of make your own creative decisions as in what subject matter you're going to tackle. Like, don't obviously like do the exact same characters or like something that's just very obviously derivative of what they've done.
Yeah.
So like I also kind of advise against trying to just out and out. I don't know what's your opinion on this,
Sure.
but I don't really advise people to kind of copy existing pieces or existing characters and make a complete replica of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, almost as a study. I feel like I suppose it could be a useful exercise in just terms of craft,
Right.
but I don't really like seeing those kind of things in portfolios. I guess I prefer to see things where they've tried to put a twist on it,
Right.
or they've taken something and done a character in a different style instead of just like a complete replica of a game character.
Totally. Yeah.
Almost, because I feel like it never looks as good as the original, right?
Yeah. And then I tell students this all the time, like especially in if they're doing faces, I say, don't do likenesses, do like the cousin of this person.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because
likeness is very difficult unless you want to be a likeness artist.
Yeah, you're either on or you're off, and if you're off because you suck. So it's like the range for sucking is way too risky for me. But at the same time, this is something that's been around for hundreds of years, because artists have always had this approach of, do we copy or not copy? And you go back to like Delacroix's
right. Like the
time.
old masters copied each other, right?
Yeah, but then not, right? Especially if you look at the Renaissance, you can see that they're copying, but they didn't. And then neoclassical artists came, and they really wanted to copy. But then you got guys like Delacroix, who were, the precursors to the Impressionists, stuff like that. He was just interpreting.
Yeah.
So
I think the idea of having a mentor or being like a mentoree is a good space to where you can kind of copy things in a guilt-free way, because you're literally just trying to learn craft.
Right.
So I think being a student is a good time to do that, and I don't think you should really feel guilty about it. But yeah, I'd say just differentiate in what concepts you choose, or the finer points of style.
Yeah, that's great. And hopefully we're going to get to steal and lift a couple of things from you today.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
All right.
And if anyone wants like to ask like more specific things or like specific examples, then I can also go into that. I'm trying to kind of talk in a more higher level way for now.
Yeah, well, Adam is asking, how do you come up with the character and scene?
Oh, let's see. Okay, this one, so it was actually based on this ramen shop that I used to go to a lot in Tokyo, where they had like Oni themed decor and accessories everywhere on the wall. And I was talking to Al, my SO, about like, oh, it'd be really cool to do like an Oni character like based on all this stuff. Who was like a little chef, like a ramen chef. And I was kind of just like, I had the idea in my mind, but I was just waiting for a chance to really get an excuse to do it. And then the contest came up, and I already had the idea, so it was very much like, oh, I'll just kind of adapt this to the brief, which I think is how a lot of people work when they do contests. You kind of already have something in mind, and you just have to adapt it to a brief. So I did some sketches that you can see on the thread, on the work thread. But I kind of prefer to concept only for maybe a day tops, and then start going into 3D immediately, and then drawing on top of the 3D model and things like that. Or just like masking on top of the body to like test out different patterns for the costume. And then for other ideas, I look at a lot of like anime figures to kind of get the idea, just to get like the scope of how many props and how many characters I wanted in this piece. And for other references, the game Muramasa was really big for this one. I really like that game. It's kind of set in like mythological Japan with like a lot of traditional folklore and demons and things like that. But with also kind of more of I wanted more of like a lighthearted feel like that game. So that was kind of the main reference point.
That's great. So when you go about doing this, you said you spend 1 day concepting, right?
Yeah, in 2D, I'd say.
In 2D. Okay, so this is just sketching. Do you do it in a sketchbook?
Yeah.
Do you do it in Photoshop?
Photoshop, yeah.
Okay. Do you print anything out or just keep it all digital?
I would keep it all digital.
Okay, great.
For speed,
All
yeah.
Right. And then when you do it, is there a particular... I didn't see the sketches, so I'm not seeing them right now, but is it line drawing? Do you do silhouettes? What are some of the tools that you use to concept?
I would I would actually go to 3D even before that and just do a base body where I was kind of 50% happy with the proportions.
Right, so you
and
jump
then
into
I'll start doing
ZBrush?
stuff like...
And then...
I jumped into ZBrush first, actually, get the base body.
Got it.
And then I start doing stuff in Photoshop where I'm like changing the size of the head, changing the length of the arms, using Liquify and using the transform tools to experiment with the body shape.
Yep.
And then for like the costume design, I would just draw on top of that in kind of big silhouette type forms at first.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I get really attached to an idea of like I really wanted those like poofy sleeves, and so I kind of knew, oh, I definitely want poofy sleeves. I'm going to do those and then work around it.
Yeah.
So, and this is, I guess, why I'm not a concept artist, is because I do get very attached to having that. I really want this element, and I'll kind of like base my design around wanting to have this element just to make it work.
Right. So you don't want somebody stepping in and saying, well, we don't really like the poofy and we want this.
Yeah. And I'd be like, no, that's the one thing I wanted to do with the costume, and I'll just kind of brute force it.
That's great. Do you have a particular brush inside of Photoshop that you like to use, or any tools in Photoshop that are really important for you at this stage?
Lasso. I just like to use is it rectangular lasso?
Yeah.
And then just use kind of fill the lasso shape with gradients.
Totally, yeah. That's
because it looks a bit more just elegant than just filling with flat color.
Yep.
And then I just work in values, so like I don't think about color.
Yeah, that's great. Dylan Cole does the same thing. It was amazing in his course to see him in like 15 minutes pull together and just an awesome concept for a landscape. So.
Oh yeah, I'd love the look of like the really hot, sharp edges.
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah, that's it. And all right, so in ZBrush, do you have any particular tools, any things that you use? Do you use like Z-spheres, Dynamesh? Do you just like take a sphere and start to pull things together, or do you have a base mesh?
I would take a base mesh of a previous character, or I would even use one that's a realistic woman, and then it's quite curious to see how far it goes from that.
Right.
But what I like to do is just smooth out the base mesh a bit. So I don't like it being high res either. I prefer them when they're more on the low side, because I feel like with the ones which have denser topology, the forms are more locked in.
Yeah. I get that.
So I prefer lower res.
Totally.
So my own one is kind of just like a very stripped back version of like a realistic human female, but it wouldn't have enough topology to hold up as a game mesh.
Yeah.
But for sculpting, I like to have the flexibility of having that super low res mesh, not like really low res, but I know if you look at like John Troy Nichols base mesh, the one I use is actually really similar to that in terms of tri count. It's definitely on the lower side, just because the flexibility is awesome.
That's great. And is it is there a particular brush Like, do you just go in with clay buildup, or do you use the inflate brush, standard brush, some people swear by?
I actually just kind of tend to use masking and transform
Okay.
at first.
Yeah.
I don't like to subdivide yet. Try to keep like the first two subdivisions. I don't really consider anatomy at this stage either in terms of muscle structure. I'm kind of just looking at overall proportional relationships. So like, head size is really huge, hand size, leg length, things like that. So, and then when I want to subdivide, I really like using inflate.
Yeah.
Especially for doing stuff like this, especially on female characters when they're really smooth.
Right.
Inflate, smooth, and move is pretty much the only brushes I'd use.
Right.
For the skin. If you want a bit of a definition, clay buildup's really nice too.
Okay, good. So inflate seems to be one of the brushes you definitely go for right off the bat.
Yeah, I love it.
Do you ever use magnify, or is it just inflate?
I've never used magnify.
Yeah.
I'll give it a go.
Okay, cool. It's basically, it's the same thing, but he just altered the algorithm. Sorry, I lost my brain there for a second. The algorithm. So inflate tends to work on the surface of something. So it'll inflate vertices along the surface. Magnify tends to bury the center of the brush like inside of, so that it'll magnify outwards.
I see. Yeah, they all have quite subtle differences, but you can it's hard to describe it. It's more of like a feeling.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, that they do. All right. So 1 day concept. So you come in, you get something kind of roughed in. Are you dividing this model as part of the concept phase, or do you? No.
Yeah, I would divide it, but I wouldn't really worry about sculpting that much. It would kind of just be like a turbo smooth base mesh essentially. So
okay, great.
Not really much structure.
Yeah, I understand that. Are you thinking props at this point and parts, and are you thinking of the poofy sleeves and all of that stuff as well?
I would do that in the 2D and then see how it all looks together.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right here, you're just looking at like what's the base body type of this character.
Yeah.
Okay. And essentially naked, right? Just no clothes, just essentially just the body type. Yet. And then you go into 2D.
Yeah, just getting a good body shape.
Okay. Yeah. And when you're in, and thank you so much for being patient with these answers. So let me know if it gets a little detailed.
Oh yeah, I want to go through and try and answer all of them.
Yeah, but it's so fascinating to see how people's different approaches. So once you've got something painted and you're ready to go, like, what's your next step once you're ready to get into the production of it?
Then, after I'm fairly happy with the concept, I'll start for things like cloth. I'll just mask out the shape and then use just extrude it and split.
Yeah.
Is extrude? What do they call it in ZBrush?
Extrude or?
Where you extrude from a mask to make extract. Extract. Sorry, extract. And then I'll Z-remesh the extraction and clean it up.
Yep.
And then I do that for every single cloth piece, which I try and think of as like, this is one asset.
Yeah.
So they all, should have a similar amount of attention, and they're all assets basically. Get everything locked out. That'd probably be about a day or two's work.
Yeah.
And then for things like spikes, I like to model those hard surface with like just in 3ds Max or Maya. I'd model those.
Right.
Because I like having the option just to box model something that has to be a precise shape.
Mm-hmm.
And then when all those are in there, the next step is kind of becoming happy with the spatial relationships with each other. So how big do I want to make the shoes? Like how wide do I want her waist to be? Things like that. And then when I feel like fairly confident on it, then I start kind of going in and really actually putting a lot of attention into the form of these individual objects.
Right.
So, spending just a day on the shoes, for instance, just like I want to make sure, you can see it here, that there's some like wood grain, and the design of the the base was just like not something I based on a real life object. So I was just kind of experimenting with several shoe designs because I knew I wanted this cutout shape.
Yeah.
And then for cloth, I don't really add wrinkles, except on the sleeves. So there's a few wrinkles, but
Hand sculpt, or do you go to Marvelous, or?
Hand sculpted for something like this because the cloth is very stylized, and I try to only put wrinkles where it would really benefit. Otherwise, I think wrinkles would make it too noisy. So I personally don't add them to things like this.
Yeah.
Because I think the style doesn't really. I don't think it would benefit from having that much, but I still like to have a little bit. Because I can't really do a character and have no wrinkles on it, you know.
Sure. Yeah, I understand.
But I think the most important thing for cloth is to have this lining on everything, which makes it feel like more like a cloth piece.
What lining?
Where it's got have this kind of folded edge.
Ah, okay, yeah. So that's a nice little trick to just make sure that it's got some stitched seam.
Yeah, that it feels like an actual cloth piece is to have, and it has thickness to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how important is anatomy to your process? Because anatomy's this is one of the de facto walls that we as artists face, and it's never ending, right? I mean, I've been studying anatomy for 20 plus years, and
yeah, it's just never ending.
Yeah, never ending.
Yeah, I just think that what I'm currently doing is never going to be perfect anatomically, but I think about the areas that are going to be on show, and then try and have a few anatomical details. Like I want to put this hip bone in here because I want the thigh to be an area with a lot of emphasis, and just having some of the pectoral here as well. So I just try and add the key landmarks of anatomy, but especially on stylized females. I honestly think it looks more appealing if the anatomical markers are mostly smoothed out except a few key areas.
Okay.
But I think anatomy influences how the character feels and how it sits. And I always think that the T-pose has to be strong and feel good. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel confident progressing on a T-pose model that doesn't feel good. Got
it. And are you thinking about environment at the same time that you're doing this, or do you do a character and then at the end throw an environment in, and you've got a whole nother character?
I think about it kind of conceptually, but I don't really worry about too many of the details about the environment. But I just know that by the end I'm probably not going to have time to do anything too crazy, so I'll just do quite a simple rock sculpture or something like that.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to go back to anatomy for just 1 second, just to get a sense of things. We know anatomy is important. We also know anatomy is not necessarily essential for a game artist job. You don't have to be a master of it, because there's so many aspects, right? But
I agree.
So how important do you think, or how far, or what advice, let's just say it this way, what advice can you offer people that are looking to be character artists? They're looking at your work, they're looking at your job and where you are. How much time should they be devoting towards mastering anatomy versus starting to really focus on concept like this and developing characters all the way?
I think it's important to have a male and female human realistic sculpts. I think the benefits of that are huge. And I think also to go beyond just an écorché, a flayed man type study, I think it's actually really good to be able to sculpt actual skin and fat on top of the muscle and have that look natural. Because I just see a lot of stuff, and I also did this and still do it sometimes, where like essentially there's no fat and skin on top, and you're just looking at a flayed sculpture, which is not what you're ever gonna that's never gonna be in a product.
Right.
So I think getting that all to feel natural is really important, and not just like placing every single muscle, but I think the proportions between how long the limbs are and the sizes of various things is much more important than knowing the name of every single muscle. Like I'd say most character artists I've worked with can't like name every muscle in the arm or anything.
Sure.
Like I don't think that's as important as being able to sculpt a proportionally accurate human.
Right.
Because a lot of the time when the skin and fat is on top, you don't see the underlying structure that much anyway.
Right.
But I think everyone should definitely do like a Scott Eaton type study.
Yeah.
And also I think doing one T-pose and one in a dynamic pose as well is really good. Great.
Okay, so for example, if I was to say that another way, it's like in the deltoid, in the shoulder, not necessarily understanding that there's the anterior, there's the posterior, and there's all three parts of that, but just knowing that there's a particular shape to it that you need to follow, and holding to that shape
and how that sits with the rest of the torso.
Yeah,
and having something that just feels natural.
Right.
I think is far more important than having like a medically 100% accurate model that's proportioned wrong.
Right. So if you were to say there's one mistake or one thing that people do in terms of the anatomy of their character that really signals to you that they're at a beginning stage, what would that be?
I think it's when the characters are when they're aiming to do a realistic human and they're like 10 heads tall.
Okay.
Having super tall humans. I think that's why I study 3D scans loads. And when I was working on the racing games, that was using photorealistic humans. So I spent a lot of time studying scans and studying what actual humans look like, because like anime really warps your mind and like playing stylized games and looking at a lot of stylized art basically like sets the standard in your brain of what a human body looks like, which is actually really out of whack.
Yeah.
Like, humans are just like squat little potato creatures, really.
Nice. Fair enough. All right. So I don't want to take up your entire afternoon, although I'm sure we would love to do that. Do you mind now? Let's just take a look and open this up a little bit to people who have questions. I'm just getting all my screens in order. And then the thing that'd be really great is just to get a sense of how you do these, of how you set up your rendering. You know, so you do this inside of Marmoset in Marmoset 3. And then what are some of the things and the ways, the processes that, you know, really give you this kind of distinct quality? Is there anything that you do right off the bat to kind of set the tone? Do you focus on the light, color?
Yeah, it's like the skybox is really important.
Okay.
So I like to choose, for stylized stuff, I like to choose the skyboxes which are really colorful, almost like unnaturally colorful. And sometimes you can even go into the HDRIs and saturate them a bit more, which can be quite interesting. And I don't really alter things like the brightness, but I think saturation is really key.
Okay.
Let me go back to the main camera. Yeah, so this is the one I actually use for the beauty shot, which has camera effects.
Okay.
Yeah, the first thing I do would be to choose the sky, and then I would pick the key light. Oh, I have to turn this one on. So this is how she looks as just a skybox.
Okay, so this is sky, just the HDRI.
Yeah, just HDRI, no other key lights. And then I actually see like sometimes student work will put something in Marmoset and not actually add lights.
Yeah.
And they'll just have the skybox. And with that, it's essentially never going to look like that in an environment. There's always going to be at least a sun. So you want to kind of put in that sun first.
Okay. And this is a particular kind. This is skylight. Okay, got it.
Oh, this one is a directional.
Okay.
But I know that spot is also fine, and spot I think actually is preferable. The lighting tutorial that's really good is Magdalena's one.
Oh yeah, she's amazing.
I really, really love that, and I would just actually follow her lighting setup because she's a master of lighting.
Yeah.
And rendering. I actually only started rendering doing real-time stuff, but she can do all, like offline rendering as well, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I have this one, and then this one is super subtle, but it's just a fill, because I didn't like how harsh the shadow was on the leg here. Okay. So it's just really particular, but I just add this fill just to kind of lighten up a few dark spots.
Did you position this in a specific place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't talk about the widths or anything, but let me go to free cam again.
So HDRI, then one directional light, which is always a sunlight, skylight of sorts. Mm-hmm. And then is there anything special you do on that other than just orientation?
Yeah, usually I change the width and the length a little bit.
Okay.
So if you do this, you actually affect the sharpness of your shadows.
Okay.
So if I increase it, can you see like you get this soft shadow blur?
Totally. Yeah. See, it just popped right in.
Yeah, that looks really great on more realistic stuff, but I actually like the graphic style really harsh shadow. Mm-hmm. I mean, over here it's a little bit alias with this camera, but
oh yeah, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, just maybe like 0.05.
Great. Okay. So just a tiny bit of width. Okay.
Yeah, just adjusting the width actually really impacts your shadow quality. So if you ever see the alias looking shadows, it's probably because although the width and the length are set to 0,
yeah,
which is kind of crazy because you never have a light that like doesn't have an actual volume, right? So you can see it more on this one. Yeah, this one is basically like a reflector. Yeah. Like if you'd have a studio light setup, this is purely to kind of fill in shadows.
Okay, got it.
So sometimes at conventions you see people walking around with like big tinfoil reflectors. So this is kind of doing that is to stop harsh lighting on the face, usually from the sun.
Right.
You know, where it's gonna really emphasize like eye hollows and things like that, which you don't want. And then I'd always check to make sure the eyes are responding properly too.
Okay.
So the cornea on this has a modeled in bump. Mm-hmm. So it actually bulges out. You can see it a little bit here. So if you don't have the bump on the cornea, then the eye reflection is not going to do what you want. So it's always something to keep in mind, to have that nice little dot highlight.
Nice.
What else? Oh yeah, then the rim. Let's turn this back on. Yeah, I made it. It does have some width to it, but I made it super bright, and I turned it so it's really, really sharp and graphic, because that's how I wanted to kind of get some of the 2D look, was having this like really, really sharp rim.
Okay, great. So this is your rim light, and this is this is basically parented to the camera.
Yeah, instead of the skybox. So I can rotate the skybox and not have the rim light rotate, and you know, because when you look at it from this angle, it's totally blown out.
Yeah.
Because you're just seeing that super bright light there.
Yep, got it. And then that way it's always a rim light because it's offset from the camera.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and so in this one, this is a spotlight, and you're definitely giving it width, length.
Yeah.
Anything else that's really important? I mean, I know spot angle is there. What about spot sharpness or vignette? Any of that significant?
I think that's, let's see, angle. Sometimes I forget what they do and I have to actually go in and adjust them.
Yeah, it's like anatomy. I mean, everything's got a different name. You can easily forget.
I think these are actually preset for spotlight.
Okay.
Like maybe distance. Oh no, is it this one?
So, but
Oh
that
no, it's
means...
because I've locked it. Wait, no, I'm being an idiot. There we go. Now I can actually mess with it.
Okay.
So that's just the direction. So how much of the character we want it to affect from that angle. Sharpness. It's kind of attenuation almost. And then vignette is the fall off. But I've set mine to be so bright and graphic that these won't really make much of an effect on this setting. And then distance. You can choose how much of how far you want the light to go.
Yeah.
So then after that, I would take a look in render settings, and I would check to make sure. Let me turn off everything here so you can see. So if I turn the light this way, now you can see AO. So AO only appears when it's not being illuminated by the direct lights.
Okay.
I'll set it a little bit harsher so you can see.
Okay, yeah, it's barely, there we go.
Yeah, it's really, really subtle.
Yeah, there's a bit of a lag between when you adjust it and when it comes to the screen. So.
Oh yeah, there'd be a little bit of lag going on.
Okay, so AO is only in the shadows.
Yeah.
That's a nice feature.
And definitely tick on the front face shadows. High res, even though putting on all these things is going to slow down your scene, but for now I'm just on 1:1 resolution. But when I do renders, or like if I'm showing someone in real life and not on more of a laggy stream, I like to turn it to double resolution.
Okay. Which
is really slow, but you can only do things like hair dithering with double resolution. Otherwise, it just gets very, very dotty.
Okay. And
local reflections also works much better with double resolution.
Okay.
But it's a really nice feature, and it kind of just adds this nice bounce. And then if I turn on GI, I'll just want to go to the main.
Now, we've run into some problems with GI where it tends to create, I don't know, like a real strong ambient occlusion.
Yeah, it's actually quite difficult to balance it. So when I'm turning it on and off here, I just like what it does to kind of illuminate the dark areas, because on the stylized pieces, I try and not have any black shadows.
Got it.
I kind of want all my shadows to have color.
Yeah.
What did you say was the thing you encountered with GI?
Well, it just gets this ambient occlusion, like it starts to shadow.
Oh yeah, the brightness actually. Okay. So I guess GI is kind of going to be most effective when you have a whole environment that envelopes the character, because otherwise the entire background, when I turn on voxels, is just black. So there's a lot of that black is gonna be like showing up in the GI.
Okay.
So I'd like to turn up the brightness.
Yeah.
Because when I turn it down.
Got it. So the HDRI is actually pretty important for that then.
Yeah. So you can see it with less brightness here. It's really black, and then when I turn it up more, it's going to brighten up your scene. It can go obviously excessive, but
it's nice though. Okay, so lighting, and you've got your 3 lights. You've got a sunlight, you've got a fill light, and you've got a rim light.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the high quality settings set in the render settings, and including GI. And then how about this? What's next? I won't guide this. I'll just ask. So what do you do next?
Oh, sure. So at that point, I'd probably start refining materials more.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to move this.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's a material that you've just used so many times that now it's just part of your vocabulary.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be the subsurface. So for this, I pretty much use subsurface diffusion for everything except metals.
Okay.
Because I think having the subsurface is essential to getting stylized materials.
Okay.
So what did I do for her? So I think the body was the only object I actually unwrapped because I wanted to have the control. So she's got a gloss map, which when I needed to make this because I wanted to have some shine on her body, but not on her face. So when you're doing kind of anime-like faces, it's important to have the actual face quite matte, and you only want a little highlight on the nose and lips. So you don't just want to leave that to a slider. You want to actually have some customization, but often the rest of the skin is quite shiny. So it's nice to have like a little highlight going on the thigh. But for instance, you wouldn't want that on the face because it's just going to look greasy.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I get that.
So I really like to have control over that. And then, yeah, that's a albedo texture.
Yeah, do you do this inside of Substance or Photoshop or ZBrush?
Oh, this was polypaint, and then I baked the polypaint to UV.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so really, really simple, but it's got a little bit of hue variation, a little bit of orange here and there, and of course you really want to emphasize the eyes.
Yeah.
And then for scatter settings, these will only work correctly if the model scale is reasonable. So when you turn on the character scale, there's an option in here to show it. Show scale reference. Okay, there it is. So in this scene, she's like around 7 feet tall, which is fine because that's human scale. But sometimes when you import a character, they're going to be like 1,000 feet tall or something. So if your character is not within a reasonable scale, then the scatter depth and the skin shading and all the subsurface is not going to work correctly. So that's really important.
Oh, that's great. That's great information.
Yeah. To get a lot of shaders to work, scale of the object is really crucial.
Okay. All right,
and then I'd like to do.
Yeah, and also I'd love to hear about the hair too.
Oh yeah.
Because you have because it looks like it's got that not that Fresnel. What do they call it? It's
anisotropic.
There you go.
Yeah, I'll find the material for the hair. Let's see. Is it this one? Just gonna make sure I'm on the right one here.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, the color is just controlled by polypaint. So this hasn't been baked to a texture. It's just raw polypaint that's actually saved to the vertex. So I use vertex color to get that to show up. I could have just set it to a local color, except I actually painted in this lighter color on the edge of the bangs, because you can see in a lot of Eastern art, they often paint the tips of the bangs a bit lighter to kind of get the idea across that the hair is like thinner at that point and is kind of like feathering out. So they often do the thing where they'll color just the tips of the bangs. Like, they'll take the local color from the skin. So I really wanted to try and do that. Let's see. Yeah, this has all got a scatter. And it's really subtle. I mean, on the stream might not even pick it up, but it just kind of smooths everything out a bit.
Yeah, I caught it is subtle, but we caught it that.
Okay, so here's the fuzz. You can see it looks a little like Blinn without fuzz. So when I put it back on, it gives like a nice Fresnel to the edges of the hair.
Yep.
But this default setting is white. You definitely don't want it to be white though. You should customize the color and have some saturation in there, which matches the local color of the hair.
Yeah.
Okay, so anisotropic. Yeah, same with these specular values here. You definitely don't want these to be white. So if I change that to white, you can see how that looks uglier in comparison. Yeah. So you want to have the saturation in there. Mm-hmm. So if I turn down the intensity, there it's gone. And then you don't want it too high because it can start looking a bit metallic. And the Fresnel is just the edges. But you also don't want that as bright white because it can look quite immersion breaking. Okay. So for reflection there, you just want to turn this from Blinn Phong to anisotropic.
Can we see what it looks like Blinn Phong?
Oh yeah, sure.
Give it a second to update. There we go. Yeah, okay.
So it kind of just looks like the jelly bean matte cap in ZBrush. And you don't have those nice streaks. So when I turn this back, yeah, now you see the direction has changed. So when you're setting up your hair, you want to play with this slider until the direction matches the orientation of the object. You can actually put a direction map in there, except for something like this, because I'm controlling the hair front and the hair back separately, this is such a small area that I didn't need to do a map because I've just broken it up into two pieces.
Okay.
And then secondary reflection is literally just to kind of really pop that. So I had this one as white, but I could try and make this a nicer color, but sometimes you can kind of get away with having a paler, a less saturated secondary reflection, as long as your primary reflection is color. So yeah, the most important thing is just changing this to anisotropic and then adjusting the direction slider to match your actual object.
Great. Okay, and then last thing before I think we open it up to people, the material for the objects, this like the piece on the shoulder.
Oh yeah. Let's find this.
Yeah.
So how I've done this is, so I set up these materials as kind of swatches. So they're all using vertex color, but they just have different specular values. Let me find the one for, there's a lot of sharing going on, so wood, it could be wood actually.
Sharing?
Let's see wood. Yeah, so I'll show you in a sec. Oh, this one's wood. Where is it? Just making sure. Okay, so everything that I wanted to be kind of subsurface, but quite matte, with a little bit of spec, uses this wood shader, and I ended up applying it to the pig as well because I liked how it looked. And the ground also uses this one.
Is this a default or something you made yourself?
I made this one myself, so it's just subsurface material. It's got scatter depth, and then if I turn that off, it's really hard to see, but you can see it now.
Okay,
kind of just like yeah. It has a more skin-like translucent quality.
So as you can you take it to 0 or really low? And
yeah.
Let's just pause.
Yeah, you can see how harsh the shadows are there.
There we go. Yes. Yeah.
So if I want the soft shadows, I have to increase scatter depth.
All right, and this is definitely one of the keys, I think, to the illustrative quality that just kind of makes the hard edges disappear that exist in 3D.
Yeah, definitely. This is really essential.
That's great.
Let me try and find the material I use for this. Black cover. Oh, maybe it could be cloth mats. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so the cloth mats material is applied to pretty much everything I wanted to have less spec. So if I turn on the vertex color, it's used across loads of different things. But I wanted to have, so I've got cloth shiny as well, which goes on the more like satin cloth pieces. And then this matte one I applied to the shoulder piece as well, because I wanted that to just be like completely matte so it didn't detract too much attention from the face area. But on these ones, I'm using microfiber. So instead of subsurface, I use microfiber.
Okay.
So it's a little bit cheaper to run. It doesn't have the subsurface, which is fine for what I'm doing, but having fuzz is really important for cloth.
Okay. Let's see it off again real quick. It'll take a second to update. All right, that's off. And now on, as you put it back on. Oh, yeah. Serves that same purpose in a sense that it takes light that hits it and it kind of just spreads it out across the surface, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like subsurface or like wax in ZBrush. Oops. All right.
Then I have a little bit of specular intensity as well, because I think it felt a bit too matte without anything at all. I'll try and find an angle where you can see that. Yeah, so I've just got a little bit of specular here.
Okay.
I didn't like the look of it being completely flat, so even the matte cloth still has some specular to it.
All right. Well, that is amazing. So we've gone through, and in summary, the essential elements are, number one, get your light set up, parent your rim light to your camera, get your sunlight, your directional light, get your fill light. And then one of the key components there is going to be making sure you get the width correct.
Yeah.
So that you really get a nice edge.
For your nice soft shadows.
Yeah, but
width and length also.
Okay, but keeping it on the low side so you keep it graphical.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then you go in and you're setting up your lighting settings. And then we come into materials. And one of the key things that I understood about the materials is just making sure that you're using subsurface scattering or microfiber. And then working with that scatter distance.
Yeah, that's right. And making sure your scene scale is correct in the context of Marmoset.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so for everybody who's here in this live, I want you guys to do me a favor. I want you to all go to Artist Awake and go to the live version of this video. And I want you to, while we're answering questions, I want you to post the one thing that you really pulled out of this series of demonstrations. What's the one thing you really learned that kind of made a difference? So make sure you head over. It's at Artist Awake. You go to the studio, and we're streaming live there right now. And I'm looking at the chat as I speak. So I'm looking there, and as you type in, I will see it. Enter in one thing that you learned from this so that I can make sure that Blair sees that and she gets that feedback from you guys and gets a real sense of what she's communicated. She'd be really, it's important for the speaker, for people who are doing this, because, we were just talking into basically a computer screen. So give us that feedback. And then I'm going to go through your questions, and we're going to start answering those.
Yeah, questions.
All right. Axel, would you use this amount of shaders when presenting a game res piece? So before you answer that, there's a big question inside of the boot camps that we do that, there's what you do in game, and then there's what you do to get the job so that you can do that in games.
Yeah.
And I tend to see those as different because, you know, in game you know you're following a pipeline and they just want to know that you can do that stuff. They don't want to know that you can do everything about it. At least that's my experience. Most of the time, I think people want to know that you can be a creative, valuable member of the team.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, would you use the same amount of shaders when presenting a game res piece? And then what could you say might be different between what you do here for yourself and what you do in the job?
So I think that depends on the current state of your project.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, if you're in pre-production, doing tests like these is essentially look development work. So what you're showing here is going to be really valuable in terms of visually communicating to the tech artists what shaders you need in your actual engine that you're using to replicate this look. So I really use Marmoset a lot on the job to kind of illustrate a best case scenario of this is the look dev I've done. What do we need to implement in order to replicate this the best we can in game? But if you're further along the pipeline and you're actually in full production, then I would not go to this length, because essentially then what you're doing is kind of taking away time you could be devoting to making this look the best it can in the proper context of the engine you're using. And doing work like this when it's in full production, I think it can come across as a little more like selfish, that you're kind of just doing this work for your own portfolio and you're not as focused on making the product look its best. So I think it totally depends on the stage of the project. So it can either be very useful or it can be more of a distraction later on when all your in-game shaders, what you're using, and your actual in-game pipeline is already 100% locked down.
Got it. Great. All right, guys, I'm seeing some questions there, or some comments, but not enough. So Ted, Shyam, Sari, Ocean, Narcissus, Matthew, Lyle, we got yours. Lyle learned that people are short. Let's read the exact quote. Are squat potato creatures. All right, Corey, need to see what you have picked up out of this. Isaac just posted his, and yeah, just waiting on Alex, Alyssa, and I think Axel. Did you post your comment? Okay, great. All right, so Eric saying he's learned to use the microfiber shader for stylized characters. That's great. Adam is saying concepting and building the scene along with the lighting to pull it all together. So probably process was really important for Adam there. Brian Link is saying the thought process of going about setting up and lighting stylized characters. Great. Corinne learned how she uses area lights as reflectors or fills and found that to be a nice shortcut. Great. And these are... Blair, these are being posted on Artist Awake, so you're not necessarily seeing those in the GoToMeeting interface. You're in right now.
Awesome. Cool.
Isaac, the importance of anisotropic and subsurface, and then using hard or soft shadows to set the stylization. Jane, concepting, utilizing 2D and 3D skills to pull the idea together. And then the last comment I have here is Corey. I learned that changing the color of the specular highlight in hair can be really important. Great. Oh, and then Narcissus was learning about the shadow quality. That's something I've really picked up on too, so that was really cool to see. And then Alyssa is saying, thank you for the in-depth explanation on how to set up lighting in Marmoset. Okay, cool. Ted learned about anisotropic. Okay, and then I'm just reading these as they come in, guys, because this is really great information. And also, when you hear how what other people learned, it gives you a different takeaway than what you might have had yourself. So, Matthew, my big takeaway from listening to Blair was the mindset she adopts when approaching her art, focusing on proper proportions over raw anatomical definition. being smart about your materials and lighting as it pertains to your target art, and of course loved her thoughts on shadows and specular lighting. Thanks, Matthew. Okay, and then Axel. Learn how shadow quality and shaders make the stylized vibe to rendering. And Axel, I think we're going to take a look at Axel's here in just a second. Axel, and I want to take a look at Lyle's. Ocean, a lot of tips on rendering and lighting that I didn't know, like how to get soft shadows that fit this kind of cute character. Corey, the width of the light was really cool. Yeah, that was actually cool for me to learn too. I didn't know about that in Marmoset.
Yeah, it's really huge actually. I didn't know about it until a few years ago either.
Yeah. And then Sari, my takeaway is lighting setups and her way of creating. Okay, cool. Okay, all right. So let me go through and see if there's any other questions. And then if you're game, Blair, I want to just introduce two people's work to you and just get your feedback.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
And you're on Artist Awake, but you don't have access to the. Yeah, maybe you should have access to the groups.
Let me see.
Yeah, do me a favor. Up at the top, search for Lyle. Lyle. Yep. And just go to his page, and if we scroll down.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's the latest one that he's working on. So Lyle, you're on right now. Give me a note in chat if there's something specific you wanted Blair to see. But otherwise, if you keep scrolling down, there was the. Oh yeah, that's a fine way to do that.
Oh, here we go. Oh, cool. Oh, he's done.
No, I think he's. This is reference we're pulling in.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah. So let's go into this timeline and just scroll all the way down.
Yeah, timeline.
Okay.
I was really confused for a sec. I was like, wait, we worked together?
Yeah, these are when they're getting the reference together.
Oh, is it this character?
Nope.
Oh, can I go further?
It should
I think I'm at the bottom.
Okay. All right. So do me a favor, if you don't mind just Googling his name. It looks like
I will definitely find
just doesn't give you, and we'll go to his art station.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yes. Yeah, we spoke the other day on Twitch.
Yep.
On Discord.
Great.
Yeah, this is awesome. I really, really like this.
Cool. So the key thing that we really focus on in the boot camp is this one idea that when people are looking at the work, now there's, of course, you're looking at the work, you look at it with your artist eye, and then there's HR that looks at it before, and they look at it with their different eye, their checklist. And so one of the things that we really try to focus on is this idea of like, what are the triggers that tell somebody, either yourself or HR or whoever's reviewing the work, that Lyle has what it takes to do the job, and what are the triggers that say that he may or may not have it. So if you're looking at this, like, what is the thing, one thing that shows you here that Lyle can do this job?
Well, to me, he's almost perfectly replicated the style of the product. Mm-hmm. He's clearly got a certain amount of mastery over sculpting forms, mm-hmm. and he's definitely captured the kind of chunky silhouettes, and he's not overly detailed things, mm-hmm. and he's kind of taken time to put details and creases in the right area, and he's like managed to interpret how we've done materials on this project, so we don't really use like noisy textures. Everything's quite uniform. There's not much noise to the textures. Everything's quite clean. So he's clearly got a grasp of the style, and I feel like there's still a lot I would want to critique on this one, but he understands the product and the style very clearly.
Okay, and then if there's one thing that you'd say, it's like, this is the trigger that's going to make somebody doubt that he can do this job. Or maybe there's more, but I'm sure it's quite limited.
I think the presentation is good, but the pose of the character could be stronger. And I know that when we're doing game art jobs, we're going to be presenting a lot of things in T-pose just to hand off. But I think when you're at an earlier stage in your project, I'd say not just for your own portfolio, but for actual jobs, it's really crucial to present things in the best way you can in order to sell an idea to the team, in order to produce work for publishers to look at, in order to kind of give them confidence in the art. So I'd want to see like a better mastery of posing.
Okay.
And I can kind of go into that if you're curious.
Is there any quick tips that that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Yeah, so I think the balance of him is he's leaning way too much to the left hand side here. Like his center of balance is off. That's the key thing that stands out to me is just like the overall balance of the character. And I also feel in this image everything's a little squashed together. I'd want to see more space between these renders so they're not quite as squished onto the page. What else would I say? The pose is so nearly there. It would literally just take a few tweaks. Let me look at it on the Mama Set viewer. Yeah, you can kind of see it here, like the leaning. So you'd want to try and get more contrapposto going on, which is where you have your hips and shoulders should be at different angles. Whereas here, his hips and shoulders are kind of both leaning off to one side. So you kind of want to have a tilt that balances the character. If you just kind of Google contrapposto, you actually get some really nice examples on classical art pieces.
That's great.
And the other thing I would critique on this one would be some of the way you've done the skin is I don't really think this really suits the style of having these cavities on the muscles. Most of the skin we did for this is a little softer, and we wouldn't really draw in these lines here. It's getting a bit like Joe Mad style. And a lot of our reference for this was like a more Eastern artwork where the skin has a softer feeling. Also on the face, yeah, you can really see it here, like just really ease up that cavity and paint out the cavity as well. So it's good to have the generated cavity map in Substance, but also go in and customize it. Also, what I feel is missing is just some more hand-painted techniques. So we do still use a lot of, I guess, League of Legends style hand-painting things in mind. So on this collar here, I would paint in AO. I would not have that harsh value change. Kind of brings me out of it. And I would also just want to paint a little more. I see you do have AO in there, but I'd like to see it with more fall off, so a broader AO overall, and just kind of like avoid these really video gamey looking harsh values changes.
Great. All right, thank you so much, Lyle. Any follow-up questions, just shoot them out. And then if you don't mind, let's take a look at Axel's work. And with Axel, we've been working a lot on the render. We had some struggles to kind of get it looking right. And so if you were to head back to Artist Awake.
Oh, yeah.
And if you just go into, I think that's Facebook.
Oh.
They look alike, but... oh, it'd be the first.
This one.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Yep. And then actually just go into the studio. So if you just type in studio, then it'll be the group. And you just go right into that group. And I just made the post right. It should be right at the top. So scroll down just a little bit. There you go. Right there with Axel. And
this one.
Yeah. So
Oh, it's cool.
yeah, just look at the images there. So I kind of curated a few images that I thought might be relevant. But this render is something that we've been trying to get right and make it not look blinny, like it's like a blin.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on this? Like, what can he do to really further this? I know you just went through a whole tutorial, but
Yeah. So the first thing I noticed on this is the shadows look really pixelated. So I'd want to check the scene scale.
Okay.
To make sure the character is falling within those that human scale. And then I'd go to look at your direct lights, your key lights, and make sure they do have width and length to stop this kind of pixelation happening. I feel like it's getting a little overexposed almost. The lighting on her skin, like I can see on the cheek there and on the nose, is almost going to white. So I would almost want to just like tone down that light a little bit. And then there is a rim light going on here also. See the full body one. Oh yeah. I think the rim light needs to be angled down so you'll get the rim on the legs here, because otherwise the value just kind of blends into the background a little bit. Also, I would check your camera. Let me go here. So yeah, check your field of view. Let me go to the free cam one. So for characters, I like to have a really low field of view and have it quite almost orthographic. So anything within the 20 to 30 range, I think looks good.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you start increasing this, oh wait, I'm on the wrong camera. 20. Free cam. Okay, so this one is higher and you can actually tell it's a bit more fisheye, but I think the default one is something like this. And can you see how like short it makes the character look?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Compared to when you have a more orthographic view, so put it like 18.
Yep.
And you zoom back out, then you're really seeing the true proportions and the character is just a much more flattering angle. So I would check this field of view and make sure it's nice and low. You can kind of tell, I think it's a little high because I can see the top of her shoes, and the camera looks like it's straight on almost, but I can still see the tops of her feet. So I would flatten this camera. That's always going to look more flattering, I think. Yeah, and get the nice rim light on the side of the leg there.
Great.
Everything else I think looks nice, except I'm not really a fan of the background, and I think it'd be nice to turn on shadow catching in Toolbag so you get some nice cast shadows, and then I would kind of just make this background a flatter color so you don't get these like compression stripes.
Great. All right. Axel, if you got any questions, just type them out, and we can go from there. So if we head back to your to Marmoset, we can start wrapping this up. So thank you so much for answering all of that, for being there.
No problem. That's really fun.
Yeah, this has been a great. So if we were to kind of start to segue to the end, like what is it that you think game artists or people who are aspiring to be game artists, what do you think they really need today to really just help them get up on the job? What are they focusing on that if they focus on it for 10 weeks would make a difference? Tough question.
To get that first job.
To get the first job, because that's all we're like. Once you got the first job, like you scaled the mountain. A little bit.
Yeah, I think this step really, the presentation, I think that should be a huge part of your schedule, is making sure that you're not just kind of half-arsing the presentation and really putting the time in that it deserves.
Yeah.
And keep checking everything, like at every stage before you've even put textures on. Check to see if your lights are looking pixelated. Like check to see if you're getting nice soft shadows. And before you even load on color, that can actually make it a little tougher to see what's going on. Like just have your character's grayscale just with a normal map. Make sure everything is baked correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure nothing is inverted. And then you can gradually start applying materials and tune them one by one. And the way I've done it here is a lot easier to tune individually. But right. When you're doing your substance work, go back and forth between either UE4 or Marmoset or whatever you want to present. Don't leave it all to the end. I would say like keep checking as you're texturing every single piece. Keep going between your target renderer and your texturing software and making sure it's looking good, and start that process early.
That's great.
I also think even getting the head sculpt into a game engine and looking at it in something other than ZBrush is really helpful. You know, you have that thing where like the field of view in ZBrush is so different to the target renderer that I think it's good to like start looking at stuff on the presentation side while you're still doing the sculpts. Like try not to think of everything in segments, but like try and think of like the whole holistic character presentation.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Great. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you guys for coming in live and for engaging Blair and giving her feedback. And Blair, thank you so much. That was just amazing. I mean, really. And I'm a huge fan of your work. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
And thanks for watching, you guys. It's it's really good to see all the work here. It's really, really high quality. Yeah. And yeah, feel free to reach out also. Just like, I don't mind answering messages and like doing feedback and everything. Yeah. So yeah, I don't mind at all.
Awesome. All right, guys, take care. Blair, I will talk to you later. Hopefully we'll have you down in Laguna. Have a brunch down here.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend. See you later.
Bye.